The gymnasium was a kaleidoscope of spinning lights and suffocating noise, a humid cavern where 500 teenagers celebrated the pinnacle of their high school existence. Yet amidst the sea of taffeta, tuxedos, and drifting balloons, 18-year-old Lily sat entirely motionless, an island of silence in an ocean of sound. The chrome rims of her wheelchair caught the reflection of the strobe lights, flashing rhythmically like a distress signal that no one was looking for, and while the music thumped against her chest, vibrating through the metal frame of her chair, she had never felt more detached from her own body or the world around her. She was wearing a dress the color of midnight, a silk masterpiece her mother had spent weeks altering to ensure it didn't bunch awkwardly around her hips or get caught in the wheels. But as Lily watched her classmates swaying in tight circles, their arms draped over each other's shoulders, she realized with a crushing clarity that the dress didn't matter, the makeup didn't matter, and her presence didn't matter. She was a ghost in a machine, visible enough to be pitied but invisible enough to be ignored, and as the clock on the scoreboard ticked closer to midnight, the hollow ache in her chest grew heavier than the paralysis that had stolen her legs 2 years ago. If you believe that every person deserves to be seen and that kindness can change a life in a single moment, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone you love. Your support helps. Let's continue to share these powerful messages of hope and second chances. 2 years ago, Lily had been the girl in the center of the circle, the varsity track star with a scholarship offer from a state university and a life that stretched out before her like a golden highway. She remembered the sensation of running, the way the wind felt against her skin, and the rhythmic pounding of her sneakers on the pavement, a feeling of absolute freedom that she hadn't realized was a luxury until it was gone. The accident hadn't been dramatic or villainous. It was a patch of black ice on a Tuesday evening, a telephone pole, and a shattered spine that divided her timeline into before and after. The after version of Lily was a warrior in physical therapy, a student who managed to keep her grades up despite the surgeries and the chronic pain, but socially, she had become something fragile and uncomfortable, a living reminder of mortality that made teenagers avert their eyes. Her friends, well-meaning but ill-equipped to handle the gravity of her trauma, had slowly drifted away, their visits becoming less frequent, their conversations filled with awkward pauses where the laughter used to be. Tonight was supposed to be the reclaiming of her youth, the night she proved to herself and everyone else that she was still Lily, not just the girl in the chair. She had spent hours getting ready, her mother curling her blonde hair and fighting back tears as she adjusted the corsage on Lily's wrist, a corsage her father had bought because no boy had asked. Lily had arrived with a forced smile, parking herself near the punch bowl, waiting for anyone, to bridge the gap. But the gap was a canyon. People said hello, of course they offered tight, sympathetic smiles and leaned down to speak to her as if she were a child, their voices pitched an octave higher than normal, before drifting back to the dance floor where legs could move and bodies could touch without the barrier of steel and rubber. She watched her ex-boyfriend, Mark, dancing with a girl from the cheer squad, his hands resting on a waist that stood at his eye level. And the jealousy that surged through her wasn't about the romance, but about the simple, effortless verticality of it all. The hours bled into one another, a blur of fast songs that shook the floorboards and slow songs that broke her heart. Lily spent most of the night gripping the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white, her smile becoming a rigid mask that hurt her face. She had considered leaving early, calling her dad to bring the van around back so she could escape the humiliation of being the wallflower, but a stubborn pride kept her planted. She didn't want to admit defeat. She didn't want to go home and see the look of devastation on her mother's face when she asked, "Did you have a wonderful time?" So she stayed, drinking lukewarm punch and pretending to watch the decorations, counting down the minutes until the lights would come up and she could disappear. The loneliness was physical, a cold weight sitting in her lap where her legs used to feel sensation, and as the DJ lowered the volume and dimmed the lights even further, announcing the final song of the night, Lily felt the sting of hot tears pricking behind her eyelids. This was at the moment every high school movie built toward, the crescendo of the evening. The opening notes of a classic ballad filled the gymnasium, a song about timeless love and enduring connection, and the effect on the room was instantaneous. The chaotic clusters of friends dissolved as couples found each other, gravitating toward the center of the floor like magnets. It was a beautiful, painful tableau of youth and romance, And for Lily, it was the final nail in the coffin of her expectations. She looked around, desperate to find just one other person sitting out, just one other soul, to share in the isolation. But even the chaperone seemed to be swaying near the bleachers. She was singular in her stillness. She unlocked the brakes on her wheels, deciding that she couldn't bear to watch this last 3 minutes of intimacy. She began to turn her chair toward the exit sign glowing red in the distance. Squeak of her rubber tire on the polished wood, sounding like a scream in her ears. David Henderson stood near the exit doors, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the scene unfold with a heavy heart that sat oddly in his chest. He was a volunteer chaperone, a single father whose own daughter Emily was currently a sophomore and dancing somewhere in the throng of students, likely oblivious to his presence. David was 45, a man with kind eyes and graying temples who worked in construction and had learned the hard way that life rarely went according to the blueprints. He had lost his wife, Sarah, to cancer 4 years ago, leaving him to navigate the turbulent waters of raising a teenage girl alone. He knew what grief looked like. He knew the shape of loneliness better than the layout of his own house. All night, amidst the chaos of teenagers, sneaking in flasks and crying over drama in the bathrooms, David's eyes had kept returning to the girl in the blue dress by the punch bowl. He had watched the stream of humanity flow around her, like water around a rock. He had seen the way her eyes lit up when a group approached, only to dim when they walked away after a few seconds of polite conversation. He saw the bravery in her posture, the way she held her chin high despite the obvious desire to shrink into the floor. It broke him. It reminded him of Sarah in her final months, the way people stopped knowing how to talk to her, how the illness became the only thing in the room. He saw Lily turn her chair away from the dance floor as the first notes of the last song began to play, and he saw the slight tremble in her shoulders that betrayed the tears she was trying to hide. He looked for her date, her friends, anyone who belonged to her. But she was entirely alone. David looked at the crowd of oblivious teenagers, then back at the girl who was about to roll out of the gymnasium and into a night that would forever be remembered as the time she wasn't enough. "Not on my watch," David whispered to himself. He pushed off the wall, straightening his tie and smoothing down the front of his blazer. He wasn't a hero, and he certainly wasn't a cool high school student, but he was a father. And he knew that sometimes the most important thing a man could do was simply show up. He walked across the periphery of the gym floor, moving with a purposeful stride that cut through the shadows. He reached Lily just as she was maneuvering around a cluster of discarded balloons near the double doors. He didn't call out to her from a distance. He waited until he was beside her, then gently stepped into her path, not to block her, but to be seen. Lily startled slightly, her hands freezing on the rims of her wheels. She looked up, expecting a teacher telling her to be careful on the ramp, or maybe a janitor asking her to move so he could sweep. Instead, she found a tall man with a gentle smile and eyes that held no pity, only a warm, quiet invitation. She recognized him vaguely as Emily Henderson's dad, the chaperone who had been manning the ticket booth earlier. He didn't loom over her. He took a step back to give her space, treating her with a deference that felt startlingly adult. "I don't think the night is quite over yet," David said, his voice deep and steady, cutting through the ambient noise of the room. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't comment on the wheelchair or the sad look on her face. He simply acknowledged the moment. Lily blinked, confused, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. I was just leaving. My dad is probably waiting. The song is 4 minutes long," David said softly, tilting his head toward the music. "I'm sure your dad won't mind waiting 4 more minutes, but I would mind very much if I let the prettiest girl in the room leave without a dance." The air left Lily's lungs. It wasn't a pickup line, it was a lifeline. She looked at his extended hand, a worker's hand with calluses and a wedding band still on his finger, and then she looked at his face. She searched for the mockery, the charity, the good deed for the day vibe, but she found none of it. She saw only sincerity. A lump formed in her throat, so large she couldn't speak. She looked down at her paralyzed legs, the unmoving silk of her dress. I can't dance," she whispered, the shame burning her cheeks. "I can't stand up." David smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made the world feel safer. "Dancing isn't about standing up, Lily. It's about feeling the music. And I'm not asking you to stand. I'm asking you to dance." He didn't wait for her to overthink it. He stepped closer and offered his hand again, palm up, waiting. It was a choice. She could leave, retreating into the safety of her invisible life, or she could take a risk. Slowly, with a trembling hand, Lily reached out. As soon as her fingers brushed his, David gently took her hand, and, with his other hand, he didn't grab the handles of the wheelchair to push her like a piece of furniture. Instead, he placed his hand on her shoulder, a respectful, grounding connection. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the floor. Lily nodded, breathless. David guided her, not by pushing from behind, but by walking beside her, his hand still holding hers. As they moved into the edge of the dance floor, he maneuvered himself so he was facing her, blocking the view of the exit, creating a small, private world between them. He took her right hand in his left and placed his right hand gently on the back of her shoulder blade, mirroring the traditional dance posture, adapting it to her reality rather than forcing her to adapt to his. He began to sway, moving his feet in a slow, rhythmic box step, and he guided her chair with a subtle pressure, rocking it gently in time with the music. It wasn't clumsy, it was fluid. He looked directly into her eyes, ignoring the hundreds of students around them. "You look beautiful tonight, Lily. That blue is your color." "Thank you," she managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. I felt like I was invisible." "You are far from invisible," David said firmly. "Sometimes people are just blind. But you," he squeezed her hand slightly, "you shine." For the first time in 2 years, Lily didn't feel like a broken object. As they moved, or rather, as they flowed together, the sheer strangeness of the pairing began to draw attention. A few students nearby stopped kissing and looked over. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but David didn't flinch, and because he held his head high, Lily found the courage to lift hers as well. She saw people watching, but the looks were changing. The pity was evaporating, replaced by something else: curiosity, respect, and perhaps a dawn of realization. They saw a man treating her not as a patient, but as a young woman worthy of the last dance. They spun slowly, David stepping around the chair, twirling her by holding her hand high, a move that made her dress flare out over the wheels. A smile, genuine and radiant, broke across Lily's face. It started in her eyes and took over her entire expression, transforming her from the tragic figure in the corner to the belle of the ball. She laughed, a sound she hadn't made in public in months, as he dipped her slightly, tipping the chair back with absolute control and safety, making her feel weightless. In that moment, the paralysis didn't exist. The wheelchair was just a prop. The music swelled, the singer hitting the high note, and David looked at her with a fatherly pride that healed a part of her heart she didn't know was broken. He wasn't trying to replace her father, and he wasn't trying to be her boyfriend. He was simply a good man, reminding her of her inherent value. He was showing every boy in that room how a woman should be treated, regardless of her circumstance. As the song began to fade, the room had gone quiet, many of the couples stopping to watch the girl in the blue dress and the older man with the kind eyes. They saw the joy on Lily's face. They saw the tears streaming down David's face. Tears for his own wife. Tears for the beauty of the moment. Tears for the unfairness of life and the beauty of overcoming it.